Wyoming Territory, 1875. Sarah Mitchell lies unconscious in the snow, betrayed and abandoned by the man who vowed to protect her. 8 months pregnant, she has little chance of surviving the bitter cold. But fate has other plans. Luke Harrison, a lone cowboy with his own painful past, finds her just in time. As he fights to save both mother and unborn child, something unexpected begins to stir in his heart. Sarah's presence awakens feelings he thought long buried beneath years of solitude. But her husband is still out there, and dark secrets lurk in the shadows of their past. Will Sarah's betrayer return to finish what he started? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather-bound journal lay open on Luke Harrison's desk, its pages weathered by years of faithful documentation. His morning ritual of recording his thoughts was interrupted by an unusual stillness in the air, the kind that preceded either a devastating storm or a life-changing moment. He couldn't have known it would be both. "Strange day," he wrote, his calloused hand steady despite the morning chill. "Something doesn't feel right in the valley." Horses were restless before dawn. Luke paused, touching the dried ink of yesterday's entry. Another lonely night catalogued among thousands. 10 years of solitude filled these pages, each entry a testament to his self-imposed exile from the world that had taken everything from him. A distant crow's call drew his attention to the window. Through the frost-etched glass, dark wings circled. Something in the snow. Luke's spine stiffened. Crows rarely ventured this close to his cabin unless... He grabbed his coat and rifle, muscle memory from years of frontier life taking over. The bitter wind bit through his layers as he stepped onto the porch, scanning the pristine white landscape. The crow circled lower, now joined by 2 others. 20 paces from his cabin, a dark shape marred the snow's perfect surface. Luke's heart quickened. He'd seen enough death in his 42 years to recognize its silhouette, even at a distance. But this was different. As he drew closer, booted feet breaking through the crusty snow, he saw the delicate curve of a woman's shoulder, half buried in white. Her dark hair spilled across the snow like spilled ink, and her skin held a bluish tinge that made his breath catch. "Ma'am?" His voice sounded foreign in the winter silence. No response. Luke knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face with gentle urgency. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with features that would have been beautiful if not for the grip of winter's touch. His trained eye caught the subtle rise and fall of her chest, alive but barely. Then he saw it, the gentle swell of her belly beneath her inadequate coat. His blood ran cold, colder than the air around them. She was with child, and far along. "Dear God," he whispered, already shrugging off his coat. Time crystallized into sharp focus as he wrapped her in the warm wool, his mind racing through the medical knowledge he'd gained during the war. Hypothermia, pregnancy, possible complications. Each thought carried the weight of 2 lives now in his hands. He lifted her carefully, one arm supporting her shoulders, the other under her knees. She was lighter than she should have been for a woman in her condition, and Luke's jaw tightened at what that might mean. A sound escaped her lips, not quite a word, but enough to kindle hope. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing a glimpse of deep brown before closing again. "Stay with me," he murmured, quickening his pace toward the cabin. "Both of you, stay with me." Inside, the fire had burned low. Luke laid her on his bed, efficiently stoking the flames before returning to assess his unexpected guest. No signs of physical trauma beyond the cold's damage, but her left hand caught his attention. A gold band on her finger told a story he wasn't sure he wanted to know. As he worked to warm her gradually, following the lessons learned from many winter campaigns, Luke's eyes kept returning to her face. What series of events had led this young mother-to-be to the brink of death in his valley? And where was the man who had promised to protect her? The answer to the second question made his muscles tense. The snow had been unmarked, except for a single set of boot prints leading away from where he'd found her. Someone had left her there, left her to die. Luke retrieved his journal, adding a terse addendum to his morning entry. Found a woman in the snow. Pregnant, abandoned. Lord help me know what to do. The next hours would determine if his discovery was a rescue or merely a gentler passing. Luke settled into the chair beside the bed, checking her pulse for the 100th time. Outside, the storm he'd sensed earlier began to gather strength, but inside, two hearts fought to keep beating beneath his watch. Sarah dreamed of warmth, of sunlight streaming through windows and her grandmother's hands guiding hers over fabric, teaching her the patient art of quilting. The memory was so vivid, she could feel the soft cotton beneath her fingers. Hear her grandmother's gentle voice. Each stitch holds a prayer, Sarah. Remember that. Reality crept back slowly. The weight of blankets, the crack and pop of a fire, the scent of coffee and wood smoke. Her eyes opened to an unfamiliar ceiling, rough-hewn beams dark with age. Panic fluttered in her chest until she felt the reassuring movement within her womb. The baby was still alive. They both were. Easy now. The voice was deep, gentle. A man moved into her field of vision, his features weathered but kind. You've been through quite an ordeal. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat felt raw with cold. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying temples, helped her sip water from a tin cup. Luke Harrison, he offered, settling back into a chair beside the bed. You're safe in my cabin. Memory crashed over her like ice water. James's face twisted with contempt, the long walk into nowhere. The moment she realized what he intended, the cold, dear God, the cold. Her hand flew to her throat, finding only bare skin. My quilt, she whispered. Did you find a quilt? Small, wrapped in oilcloth? Luke frowned, then understanding dawned. He crossed to where her frozen clothes hung by the fire and retrieved a bundled package. This was clutched in your arms, wouldn't let it go, even half frozen. Sarah's hands trembled as she unwrapped the oilcloth. The quilt within was small, perfect for a cradle, and every patch held a story. Her grandmother's wedding dress, her mother's favorite apron, her own childhood pinafore, 3 generations of women stitched together in a promise for the future. My grandmother started it, she explained, though Luke hadn't asked. When I told her I was expecting, she didn't live to finish it. Her fingers traced the incomplete border, the needle still threaded and waiting. It's all I have left of home. Luke watched her quietly, something shifting in his expression. You're running from someone. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered. Anyway, my husband. The word tasted bitter. James Mitchell. He changed after we lost the farm, started gambling, drinking. When I told him about the baby, he seemed to come back to himself. Said we'd start fresh out west. She laughed, a hollow sound. I was such a fool. The only fool was the man who left you to die. Luke's voice carried an edge of steel. Your husband, he did this deliberately. Sarah nodded, clutching the quilt closer. The debts caught up with him, he said. Her voice broke. He said 2 graves were easier to dig than 1. Luke stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The storm outside had strengthened, wind howling like a wounded thing. When he turned back, his face was carefully composed. You need rest. The baby is strong, Sarah finished, feeling another kick. Like his grandmother always said he'd be. A ghost of a smile touched Luke's lips. His? Call it a mother's. Intuition. Sarah tried to smile back, but exhaustion was pulling her under again. The quilt in her hands anchored her to consciousness. Each beloved scrap, a reminder of why she had to survive. Sleep, Luke said softly. I'll keep watch. As Sarah drifted off, she heard him adding wood to the fire, his movements quiet and sure. In her dreams, she was in her grandmother's parlor again, learning to quilt. But now there was a new presence, a tall figure by the window, standing guard against the gathering dark. Luke watched the snow fall beyond the frosted glass. His thoughts as turbulent as the storm. The quilt spoke volumes, not just of the woman's history, but of her character. Someone who would clutch a family heirloom through unconsciousness wasn't the type to fabricate such a tale of betrayal. He retrieved his journal, noting the date with military precision. Below it, he wrote, "The storm's gotten worse. 2 days. Ride to the nearest doctor, and she's in no condition to travel. All I can do is wait and pray. Though God knows I'm out of practice at both." The night stretched ahead, long and dark. But for the first time in years, Luke Harrison wasn't alone in his vigil, and somehow that made all the difference. Before dawn, Sarah's fever spiked. Luke recognized the rattling in her chest. The cold had settled deep in her lungs. He pulled an old army trunk from beneath his bed, hands finding the familiar brass latches in the darkness. Inside, nestled in straw, sat a wooden box with Dr. T. Harrison burned into its lid, his father's medicine box. Luke hadn't opened it since inheriting it 5 years ago, but his fingers remembered every compartment. Dried yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain, horehound for cough. The knowledge passed down from father to son felt like a lifeline now. "This might taste bitter," he warned, helping Sarah sit up. Her skin burned against his hands. "But it'll help bring the fever down." Sarah managed a few sips of the yarrow. Tea before slumping back against the pillows. "You know medicine," she observed, voice rough. "My father was a doctor, taught me what he could." Luke measured out more herbs, movements precise. "Served as a field medic during the war too. Saw more than my share of fever cases." "The war?" Sarah's eyes cleared slightly. "Which side?" "Union." Luke's answer was clipped. Some memories were still too raw to share. "Rest now. The medicine will take hold soon." But Sarah's fever made her bold. "You lost someone." It wasn't a question. Luke stilled, the medicine box opened before him like a confession. "My wife, Caroline. Influenza while I was away fighting." His voice softened. "She was carrying our first child." Understanding passed between them, deep as mountain roots. Sarah reached out, her burning hand finding his. "I'm sorry." Dawn crept into the cabin, painting the walls gold. With it came the first signs of the fever breaking. Sarah's breathing eased, and her skin began to cool. Luke watched the color, returned to her cheeks, relief loosening the knot in his chest. "Your father," Sarah murmured, half asleep. "He would be proud. You saved us both." Luke closed the medicine box gently, tucking it away with its burden of memories. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world hushed and new. Perhaps, he thought, some healings went both ways. Sarah sat in Luke's rocking chair by the fire, watching sunlight dance across her wedding ring. Once a symbol of love and promise, now it felt like a shackle. She twisted it absently, remembering the day James had placed it on her finger. His eyes bright with dreams of their future together. "You should eat something." Luke's voice drew her from her reverie. He set a bowl of steaming stew before her, the aroma making her stomach growl. "The baby needs strength." "James wasn't always cruel," Sarah said suddenly, surprising herself. "When we first married, he was different. Kind. Hard-working." She spooned the stew slowly, gathering her thoughts. "We had a small farm in Ohio. Nothing grand, but it was ours, or so I thought." Luke settled into the chair opposite her, his presence steady and patient. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, reminding Sarah that he'd seen enough of life to understand its complexities. "The drought came first," she continued. 2 years of watching the earth crack and crops wither. James started drinking, just a little at first. Then came the moneylenders. Her hand trembled, spilling a drop of stew. "He'd mortgaged everything. Without telling me. The farm, the livestock, even my mother's silver. Men do desperate things when they're drowning," Luke observed quietly. Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Desperate. He found a new kind of drowning in the saloons. Gambling, whiskey, women." She touched her swollen belly. "When I told him about the baby, he seemed to change. Said God had given him a second chance. Convinced me to sell what little we had left and head west for a fresh start." She pulled the ring off slowly, holding it up to the light. 3 days ago, he said he needed to scout ahead. When he came back, his eyes were different, cold. He made me walk until I couldn't anymore. Then her voice broke. Luke leaned forward, his face grave. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Sarah's voice strengthened. He said he had a buyer for me in a mining town. Said my condition would fetch a good price from the right man. When I refused to go further, she closed her eyes. He left me to die rather than let me ruin his plans. The ring caught. The sunlight one last time as Sarah held it out over the fire. Luke's hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. Keep it, he said softly. Not as a reminder of him, but of your strength. You survived. Sarah withdrew her hand, considering the simple gold band. It's worth something at least. I'll need money to start over. First, you need to rest and heal. Luke's tone left no room for argument. Winter's far from over, and you're safe here until spring. Why are you doing this? Sarah asked, the question that had burned since she first woke in his cabin. Taking in a stranger, risking involvement in another man's crimes. Luke was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Because 20 years ago I couldn't save my wife and child, but today God or fate or whatever you believe in gave me another chance. He met her gaze steadily. I aim to do right by it. Sarah slipped the ring into her pocket, its weight now a reminder of choices rather than chains. Outside, a fresh blanket of snow covered the tracks of the past, while inside, 2 wounded souls began the slow work of healing. Luke moved to the window, checking the sky. Storms coming back around. Might last a few days. Good, Sarah said softly. I could use more time to think. The ring in her pocket seemed lighter somehow, transformed from a symbol of betrayal into something else, a token of survival, of choices yet to be made. She touched her belly, feeling the strong kicks of the child within. Whatever came next, they would face it together, this little one and her. And perhaps, she thought, watching Luke's strong back as he added wood to the fire, they wouldn't face it alone. Luke spread the weathered maps across his desk, their edges curling from years of use. Faded ink traced the veins of rivers and arteries of trails across the Wyoming territory. Each route a possible path James Mitchell might have taken. The mining towns are here, he explained to Sarah, his finger tracing a cluster of marks near the mountains. Deadwood, mainly. It's where most of the desperate sorts end up. Sarah stood beside him, close enough that he could smell the lavender, soap she'd used to wash her hair. 3 weeks of proper meals had brought color back to her cheeks, strength back to her frame. You think that's where he went? She asked, studying the map intently. Man like that, running from debts and worse? It's his likely play. Luke pulled out another map, this one showing the stage routes. Town's been buzzing with talk. Seems your husband left quite a trail. Sarah tensed. You went to town? Had to, running low on supplies. Luke kept his voice casual, though the news he'd heard was anything but. Mitchell's been noticed. Gambling halls mainly. Losing more than winning. He always did. Sarah's hand drifted to her belly, a protective gesture Luke had come to recognize. Did anyone ask about me? Luke hesitated. The truth was, Mitchell had been asking questions, dangerous ones, offering money for information about a pregnant woman, claiming she was his sick wife he was trying to find. Some in town had believed him, drawn in by his smooth talk and seemingly genuine concern. Few people noticed a stranger passing through, he said carefully. Winter makes folks mind their own business. But Sarah heard what he wasn't saying. He's looking for me, isn't he? He won't find you here. Luke's tone carried the weight of a promise. Not while I'm breathing. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks dancing. Sarah moved closer to the warmth, her arms wrapped around herself. I can't stay forever, Luke. You know that. You can stay as long as you need. He rolled the maps carefully, trying to ignore the ache her words caused. Spring's still months away. And then what? Sarah turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I have nothing. No money, no family, no skills except farm work. And with a baby, Luke crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You have time. Time to heal, to plan. And you're not alone. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Sarah's eyes met his, and Luke felt the familiar tug in his chest, the one he'd been fighting since she first opened. Her eyes in his cabin. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They sprang apart like guilty lovers, though they'd done nothing wrong. Luke moved to the window, peering through the frost-etched glass. It's Martha Wells, the midwife. Sarah relaxed slightly, but Luke noticed she still moved to the shadows, away from the door's sightline. Some habits of fear didn't fade quickly. Martha bustled in with a flurry of snow and nervous energy. "Lord above, Luke Harrison, you could have told me sooner you had company." Her eyes found Sarah, softening with professional concern. "Though I can see why you might have wanted to keep things quiet." "Martha," Luke's voice carried a warning. "You rode out in this weather for a reason." The midwife's face grew serious. "I thought you should know. There's a man in town, asking questions about a pregnant woman, offering good money for information." She looked at Sarah kindly. "I'm guessing you're the one he's looking for, dear." Sarah's face had gone pale, but her voice was steady. "Yes, he's my husband." "Was," Luke corrected quietly. "A man who leaves his wife to die forfeits that title." Martha nodded approvingly. "My thoughts exactly. Which is why I came to warn you. He's got some rough types with him now, men who don't ask so politely." Luke's hand moved unconsciously to where his gun belt hung by the door. "They know about my place." "Not yet, but it's a small territory." "Luke, won't take long for someone to remember you live out here." Sarah made a small sound, like a wounded animal. Luke wanted nothing more than to go to her, but Martha was already there, her capable hands guiding Sarah to a chair. "Now then, dear, let's have a look at you while I'm here. Can't have all this excitement harming the little one." She shot Luke a meaningful look. "Some privacy, if you please." Luke grabbed his coat. "I'll check the stock." At the door he paused. "Martha, thank you." The midwife's eyes were kind but fierce. "We take care of our own out here, Luke. Always. And have." Outside, the wind had teeth. Luke stood in the barn doorway, watching snow erase his tracks. The maps in his cabin showed every trail in the territory, but they couldn't show him the way out of this. For the first time in years, he had something to lose, and that made him dangerous in ways James Mitchell couldn't begin to imagine. Martha's examination was gentle but thorough, her weathered hands moving with practiced confidence over Sarah's swollen belly. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm shadows across the room as Sarah worked on the baby blanket in her lap, fingers moving steadily with each stitch. "The little one's strong," Martha announced, smiling. "Good position, too, though I'd prefer if you'd gained a bit more weight by now." Sarah set aside her needlework, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing that good food and rest won't fix." Martha helped Sarah adjust her clothes. "Though I'd feel better if you were closer to town when your time comes. February storms can be treacherous." Sarah's hands returned to the blanket, seeking comfort in its familiar texture. The wool was soft, dyed a gentle cream that reminded her of morning light. "I can't risk town, not with James there." Martha settled into the chair opposite, her face thoughtful. "Then we'll need to prepare, proper-like." She eyed the half-finished blanket. "That's fine work you're doing there." "It helps me think," Sarah admitted, running her fingers over the intricate pattern of knots and cables. "Each stitch is like planning for the future, making something real. A mother's work." Martha nodded approvingly. "Speaking of which, Luke tells me you've been having trouble keeping food down in the mornings." "Just lately. The smell of coffee turns my stomach, though it never did before." Martha rummaged in her bag, producing a small packet of dried herbs. "Peppermint and ginger. Make tea with it, and tell that man of yours to drink his coffee outside for a while." Sarah blushed. "He's not my—" "Hush now." Martha's eyes twinkled. "I've known Luke Harrison 20 years. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when you're not watching." Outside, they could hear Luke chopping wood, the steady rhythm of axe against log carrying through the walls. Sarah's fingers traced the blanket's pattern, following. The way the stitches flowed into each other, creating something whole from separate threads. "It's not that simple," she said softly. "Love rarely is." Martha began packing her supplies. "But I've delivered babies for 30 years, child. Seen all sorts of beginnings. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose, not the ones we're born to or bound to by law." Sarah's hands stilled on the blanket. "I'm still married to a man who tried to kill you and your babe." Martha's voice was steel wrapped in wool. "God himself would understand if you chose differently now." The sound of chopping stopped. Boots scraped on the porch outside. "Think on it," Martha said, standing as Luke entered, bringing a gust of cold air and the scent of fresh-cut pine. "I'll be back in 2 weeks, weather permitting. Keep working on that blanket. The little one will need it soon enough." Luke helped Martha with her coat, their voices low as they discussed something by the door. Sarah returned to her stitching, each loop and turn of the yarn a small act of faith. The blanket grew beneath her hands, row by row, like hope taking shape. Martha's parting words lingered in the air long after she'd gone, mixing with the smoke. From the fire and the quiet sounds of Luke moving about the cabin, Sarah worked until the light grew too dim to see. The blanket in her lap, holding dreams she didn't dare name yet, but they were there, taking form with every stitch, like a path, being revealed one step at a time. The letter arrived with the weekly supply wagon, carried by a nervous boy who wouldn't meet Luke's eyes. Rough paper, folded 3 times, sealed with a blob of red wax that looked like a drop of blood in the winter light. Luke waited until the wagon was gone before breaking the seal. His face hardened as he read, jaw tightening with each line. "Mr. Harrison, word travels fast in small territories. We hear you're harboring something that belongs to James Mitchell. A man's property is sacred in these parts, be it wife or otherwise. Mitchell's willing to be reasonable, $500 for information leading to his wife's return. Same offer stands for you. Choose wisely. Winter's a dangerous time for accidents. Regards, J.D. Cooper Deadwood Mining Company." The signature was a lie. Luke knew Cooper had died 2 years ago, but the threat was real enough. He burned the letter in the kitchen stove, watching the paper curl and blacken. Sarah found him there, still staring at the ashes. "Bad news? Nothing to worry about." The lie tasted bitter, just business. But Sarah had grown to know his faces. Luke. Just his name. Soft, but insistent. He turned to her, seeing not the frightened woman he'd found in the snow, but someone stronger, someone who deserved the truth. "They know you're here." His voice was gentle, cushioning the blow. "James has hired men. They're offering money for information." Sarah's hand went to her throat, an unconscious gesture of fear, but her voice remained steady. "How much?" "Doesn't matter. No one who matters will take it. Everyone has a price." The bitterness in her voice spoke of hard-learned lessons. "James taught me that." Luke crossed to her, his hands finding her shoulders. "Not everyone. Martha rode through a storm to warn us. The supply boy could have given them our location today, didn't even take the letter inside town limits. There are still good people, Sarah." She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Like you?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Luke's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders, then released. "I'm just trying to do what's right. Is that all?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Before Luke could answer, a sound caught his attention. Horses, multiple sets of hooves breaking through crusty snow. His body tensed, instincts from the war rising like smoke. "Back room," he said quietly. "Stay low. Stay quiet." Sarah moved without argument, understanding the urgency in his tone. Luke retrieved his rifle from beside the door, checking the load with practiced hands. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Not James. These were hired men, the kind who did ugly work for ugly money. They rode with the easy confidence of men who believed their guns made them gods. Luke stepped onto his porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Private property, gentlemen." The leader, A scarred man with dead eyes smiled without warmth. "Just passing through, friend, looking for strays." "Nothing stray here except you." The men exchanged glances. The leader's smile widened, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Heard you might have taken in a lost lamb. Pretty thing in a delicate condition." "Heard wrong. That's not what the tracks say." The man gestured to the snow around the cabin. "Two sets of prints. Unless you've taken to wearing women's boots." Luke's finger tightened imperceptibly on the trigger. Last warning, ride on. For a long moment the only sound was the wind through bare branches. Then the leader shrugged an elaborate gesture of surrender. "No need for trouble. Not today." He turned his horse, but his eyes stayed on Luke. "Winter's long, though. Lots of cold nights ahead." They rode away slowly, a deliberate insult. Luke waited until they were out of sight before lowering his rifle, his hands steady but his heart racing. Sarah appeared in the doorway, face pale but composed. "They'll be back." "Yes, with more men." "Probably." She stepped closer. Close. Enough that he could feel her warmth. "What do we do?" Luke looked at her, seeing not a burden or a responsibility, but a woman worth fighting for, worth dying for if it came to that. "We prepare," he said simply, "and we show them what it means. To threaten what's ours." The evening after the riders left, Luke brought out a small wooden box from the trunk beneath his bed. Inside, wrapped in faded blue silk, lay his mother's Bible. The leather binding was worn smooth with age, its pages filled with generations of careful notations. "My mother started this tradition," he explained, opening to the family records page. "Every birth, death, marriage, all recorded here." His finger traced the elegant script. Sarah Elizabeth Harrison, born 1832. Married Thomas James Harrison, 1850. Sarah sat beside him on the settee, drawn by the intimacy of this shared history. She had beautiful handwriting. She taught school before marrying Pa. Luke turned a page, revealing pressed flowers between the leaves. Said a person's words should be as beautiful as their thoughts. The Bible's pages held more than just records. There were notes in the margins, small prayers, wisdom passed down through years. Sarah's eyes caught a familiar passage. "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." Your mother underlined that verse. "She read it at my wedding to Caroline." Luke's voice softened with memory. "Said love was more than just feeling, it was a choice you make every day." Sarah's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "She sounds wise." She was. Luke looked at their joined hands, then at Sarah's face in the firelight. "She would have liked you." The air between them changed, charged with unspoken possibilities. Sarah felt her heart quicken as Luke's free hand rose to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. "Luke," she whispered, half warning, half plea. "I know." His voice was rough with emotion. "You're still married. It's not right." "No," Sarah said, softly. "What's not right is denying what's growing between us." The Bible lay open between them, its pages witness to this moment of truth. Luke's hand trembled slightly as it cupped her cheek. "I never expected—" he started. "Neither did I—" Sarah leaned into his touch. "But here we are." The kiss, when it came, was gentle as prayer. Luke's lips brushed hers with infinite tenderness, as if she might break. Sarah responded with all the longing she'd been holding back, her fingers tightening in his. When they parted, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I'll protect you," he promised, "both of you." Sarah touched his face, tracing the lines that worry and time had carved. "I know, but I'm not hiding anymore. Whatever comes, we face it together." Luke pulled back slightly, studying her face. "Your husband is no longer my husband in any way that matters." Sarah's voice was firm. "The man I married died long ago in a bottle of whiskey. What's left is just a shadow." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Luke gathered the Bible carefully, closing it with reverence. "My mother wrote something else," he said, opening to the last page. There in fading ink, "Love comes not always when expected, but always when needed. Trust in God's timing." Sarah smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Your mother really would have liked me. She would have loved you. Luke drew her close, his arms strong and sure. As I'm coming to, the confession hung. In the air, like music, Sarah turned in his embrace, her head finding the place on his shoulder that already felt like home. I think, she said softly, I'm already there. Outside, snow began to fall, each flake a new beginning. Inside, two hearts beat in sync, while a Bible full of love stories witnessed the start of one more. Martha's next visit brought more than medical supplies. She pulled a crumpled poster from her bag, spreading it flat on Luke's table. The rough sketch showed a face Sarah knew too well. James Mitchell's features rendered in harsh black ink. Wanted for fraud, theft, and attempted murder, James Mitchell, $500 reward, dead or alive. Sheriff put these up yesterday, Martha explained. Seems your husband's been busy, swindled half the miners in Deadwood before they caught Wise. Sarah stared at the familiar face, so strange in this context. Attempted murder? A card game gone wrong. Martha's voice was gentle. He shot a man in the back. Fellow might not walk again. Luke stood behind Sarah, his hand steady on her shoulder. He's desperate now. Desperate men make mistakes, or become more dangerous, Sarah said softly, one hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. Town's taking sides, Martha continued, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Some believe his story about searching for his sick wife. Others, she gestured to the poster. Well, truth has a way of coming out. Luke studied the poster, his expression hardening. He'll come here, soon. Why are you so sure? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Because it's what I'd do if I were him. Running out of options, law closing in. Luke's voice carried the weight of military experience. He needs money and a hostage. You're both. The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth failing to touch the chill that had settled over the room. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with promise. I've been thinking, Martha said carefully. My sister's place in Colorado. It's far enough. No. Sarah's voice was firm. I'm not running anymore. Luke turned to her, concern etched on his face. Sarah, this baby will be born in a home, not on the run. She touched the wanted poster, tracing the familiar yet foreign features. I'm done letting James Mitchell control my life. Martha exchanged a look with Luke that spoke volumes. Then we prepare properly this time. Luke nodded, military strategy replacing worry in his eyes. Town's 4 hours ride. If he comes, when he comes, Sarah corrected. When he comes, Luke acknowledged, we'll need to be ready. Martha, can you? Already done. The midwife patted her bag. Extra medical supplies just in case. And Tom at the general store knows to send word if any strangers start asking questions. Sarah stood, moving to the window. The gathering storm painted the world in shades of grey, like the uncertain future ahead. But for the first time since James had left her in the snow, she felt no fear, only resolve. He thinks I'm weak, she said, watching the first snowflakes fall. He always did. Never saw me as anything but property. Luke's arms encircled her from behind, strong and sure. His mistake. Martha gathered her things, the wanted poster disappearing back into her bag. I'll check back in 3 days, sooner if the weather holds. At the door, she paused. Sarah, that baby of yours is due in less than a month. Whatever's coming needs to come soon. After Martha left, Luke and Sarah stood at the window, watching the storm approach. The wanted poster had changed everything and nothing. Their path was the same, but now the stakes were clear. Are you afraid? Luke asked softly. Sarah leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. Not anymore, she answered truthfully. Fear is what kept me with him for so long. I'm done with fear. Luke pressed a kiss to her temple. Then we wait, and we show James Mitchell what real strength looks like. The storm broke over the valley. Snow falling thick and fast, but inside warmth bloomed like courage, like love, like the promise of tomorrow. Luke kept the pearl-handled revolver in a carved wooden box beneath his bed. It had been his father's, passed down along with the doctor's kit, tools of healing and harm, each necessary in their own way. Tonight, as Sarah's first labor pains began, he cleaned it with practiced care. "Another one's coming," Sarah gasped, gripping the bedpost. Sweat dampened her hair despite the winter chill. Luke checked the cylinder, each brass cartridge a small promise of protection. "Breathe through it like Martha showed you." "Too early," Sarah panted. "The baby's not due for 2 more weeks." But they both knew babies kept their own time. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the promise of another storm. Luke tucked the revolver into his belt and moved to support Sarah's back. "I need to get Martha." Sarah clutched his arm. "Don't leave, please. You need help." He touched her face gently. Real help, not just an old soldier playing doctor. A contraction seized her, stealing her protest. When it passed, she nodded weakly. "How long?" 4 hours there and back. "If the weather holds." He helped her to the bed. "I've laid out everything you might need. Water, medical supplies, and if James comes while you're gone." Luke drew the pearl-handled revolver, pressing it into her hands. The grip was smooth as silk, worn by generations of careful handling. "You remember what I taught you?" Sarah's fingers found their position naturally, just as he'd shown her during their practice sessions. "Aim center, squeeze, don't pull, keep breathing. That's my girl." He kissed her forehead, lingering a moment. "I'll be back before you know it." Another contraction gripped her. Through clenched teeth, Sarah managed, "Hurry!" Luke saddled his fastest horse, every minute away already feeling too long. The last thing he saw before riding out was Sarah at the window, one hand on her belly, the other holding his father's revolver, steady and sure. The storm caught him halfway to town, snow thick enough to blind. His horse fought through drifts, steam rising from its flanks. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but Martha's skills were needed now more than his protection. An hour into his ride, he heard them. Horses in the storm, moving fast and purposeful. Too many to be friendly travelers. Luke turned off the trail, guiding his mount into a grove of pines. Through the swirling snow he counted 5 riders, their shapes dark against the white. They rode with the urgency of men who knew their quarry was close. James Mitchell had finally made his move. Luke waited until they passed, then wheeled his horse around. The wind carried their voices back to him, harsh commands, cruel laughter. They were headed straight for his cabin. For Sarah, his horse, sensed his urgency, picking up speed despite the treacherous footing. But the storm worked against him, the same snow that masked his pursuit slowing his return. In the growing darkness, Luke's mind painted pictures he couldn't bear. Sarah alone in labor, facing down the man who had tried to kill her. The pearl-handled revolver was a comfort and a curse. He'd taught her to shoot, yes, but no one should have to defend their life while bringing new life into the world. A gunshot echoed across the valley, sharp even through the howling wind. Luke's heart stopped, then started again with terrible purpose. He dug his heels into his horse's flanks, no longer caring about stealth or safety. He was still too far away, too far to know if the shot had come from his father's revolver or another gun, too far to know if Sarah... No, he wouldn't let himself think it. Sarah was strong, stronger than anyone knew. She would survive. She had to. The baby would come tonight, ready or not, and James Mitchell would learn what happened to men who threatened what Luke Harrison loved. Through the storm, through the darkness, through his own fear, Luke rode and prayed that he wouldn't be too late. Sarah recognized James's coat before she saw his face. Dark wool, with a torn left sleeve, now spattered with snow and something darker. Blood. The sight of it through the cabin window sent another contraction ripping through her body. "I know. You're in there, Sarah." His voice carried through the howling wind. "Time to come home." She steadied herself against the wall, pearl-handled revolver firm in her grip. The other hand pressed against her swollen belly, feeling the baby move. Restlessly within, "Nothing to say to your husband." James's tone held that familiar edge, the one that had always preceded his worst rages. "After all the trouble I've gone through to find you." Sarah positioned herself beside the door, remembering Luke's lessons. "Better angle, more cover. You're not my husband anymore. You lost that right in the snow." A laugh, cold as the storm. "That's not how marriage works, dear wife. Till death do us part, remember?" Another contraction seized her, nearly making her cry out. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, refusing to let him hear her pain. "Last chance, Sarah. Open the door, or we do this the hard way." She could hear his men positioning themselves. Around the cabin, 5 sets of boots in the snow, just as Luke had taught her to count. Too many. The hard way, then. The first shot splintered the doorframe near her head. Sarah dropped to a crouch, aiming the revolver at knee height. Another of Luke's lessons. "Center mass is best," he'd said, "but a man can't chase you with a shattered knee." James's voice turned cajoling. "Don't be foolish, Sarah. You're in no condition to fight. Think of the baby." "I am thinking of the baby." Her voice was steel. "That's why I'll die before I let you near us." The door burst open, winter wind howling. Through the cabin, James stood silhouetted against the snow, his coat dark with old violence and new determination. "No one's dying tonight," he said, stepping forward, "except maybe that cowboy when he returns. My men are waiting." The pearl grip was slick with sweat in Sarah's hand, but her aim remained true. Not one step closer. James saw the revolver and smiled, that same smile that had once charmed her, now twisted with malice. "You won't shoot me. You never had the spine for—" The gun roared in Sarah's hands. James staggered back, his coat blooming red-high on the left shoulder, his face transformed from confidence to rage. "You little—" A contraction dropped Sarah to one knee, the gun wavering. James lunged forward, blood staining his coat black. In the firelight, 2 more shots split the night, not from Sarah's gun. James jerked like a puppet with cut strings. Behind him, Luke stood in the doorway, rifle smoking in the winter air. "Get away from my family," Luke said quietly, and in his voice was every promise he'd ever made her. James turned, his coat now soaked with spreading darkness. "Family?" He laughed, blood on his teeth. "She's mine, always will be." "No." Sarah stood, pearl-handled revolver steady once more. "I'm not property to be owned, not anymore." The baby moved within her, strong and certain. Another contraction gripped her, but she kept the gun level. James saw something in her eyes then, something that had been growing since the day he'd left her in the snow. Something unbreakable. "Sarah?" For the first time, fear crept into his voice. "Goodbye, James." The pearl-handled revolver spoke one final time. James Mitchell fell, his coat spreading darkness across the cabin floor like spilled ink, like the final words of a story better left untold. Luke caught Sarah as her knees buckled, easing the gun from her grasp. Outside, his shot had scattered. James's men into the storm. Inside, the fire cast warm light on Sarah's face as another contraction took her. "Martha!" she gasped. "Right behind me." Luke gathered her close. "You did good, love. You did so good." Sarah looked at James's still form, at the coat that had haunted her dreams, now empty of all threat. "The baby's coming, I know." Luke pressed his lips to her damp forehead. "But this time, you're not alone. Never alone again." Through the open door, Martha appeared, medical bag in hand, determination on her face. The storm raged on, but inside, the cabin, a new life prepared to enter the world, free of shadows, free of fear, born into love's waiting arms. Sheriff Thomas Wade sat at Luke's kitchen table the next morning, spreading papers across the scarred wood. Outside, men loaded James Mitchell's body into a wagon, their movements muffled by fresh snow. "Found these in his saddlebags," the sheriff said, gesturing to the documents. Seems your husband was a busier man than anyone knew, Mrs. Mitchell. Sarah sat in Luke's chair by the fire, exhausted from labor but too restless to sleep. The baby boy nursed at her breast, wrapped in the quilt she'd finished just hours before his arrival. Not Mitchell, she corrected softly. Not anymore. The sheriff nodded, understanding in his weathered face. These papers tell quite a story. Forged deeds, false bank drafts, contracts with borrowed names. He pushed a particular document forward, including a marriage certificate to a widow in Deadwood, dated 3 months ago. Luke, who hadn't left Sarah's side since the birth, went still. He was already married. To 3 women by my count, all while still legally bound to you, ma'am. Sarah looked down at her son's peaceful face, so new to the world. Bigamy, on top of everything else. Along with fraud, theft, and attempted murder, both yours and that fellow in Deadwood. The sheriff gathered the papers carefully. These'll make sure he's remembered for what he truly was. A coward, Luke said quietly, who died like one. The sheriff's eyes moved between them, noting Luke's protective stance. The gentle way Sarah leaned into his presence. The shooting was clean. Clear case of self-defense, protecting home and family. No one will question it. And the men who rode with him, Luke asked, scattered to the wind, though we found this in the snow. The sheriff produced one final document, a contract with the Deadwood Mining Company, promising payment for recovery of property. Sarah's arms tightened around her son. He tried to sell me, like cattle. He failed. Luke's voice carried the weight of a vow. You're free now, truly free. The sheriff stood, gathering the damning papers. I'll need official statements, but they can wait. That little one's more important right now. He paused at the door. Does he have a name yet? Sarah looked up at Luke, a quiet question in her eyes. He nodded, understanding without words. Thomas, she said, Thomas Harrison Mitchell. Her voice strengthened. Though we'll be changing that last name if the law allows. The sheriff smiled. I expect it will, ma'am. I expect it will. After he left, Luke knelt beside Sarah's chair, one finger tracing their son's tiny features. Harrison, eh? If you'll have us. Sarah's voice held both hope and certainty. Both of us. I had something to ask you anyway. Luke reached into his shirt pocket, withdrawing a simple gold ring, nothing like the elaborate one James had given her. Was my mother's. She'd want you to have it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? Been sure since I found you in the snow. He took her free hand, his touch gentle. What do you say? Ready to be a Harrison? The baby stirred, making small, contented sounds. Through the window, dawn painted the snow-covered valley in shades of promise. Yes, Sarah whispered. We both are. Luke's kiss tasted of joy and new beginnings. On the table, the sheriff's saddlebags held the papers that had ended one chapter of Sarah's life. But here, in this moment, with her son in her arms and love in her heart, she was already writing the next. Martha smoothed the birth certificate against the table, her neat handwriting filling the blank spaces with careful precision. The morning sun streamed through freshly washed windows, catching the ink as it dried. Territory of Wyoming certificate of live birth name, Thomas Harrison Mitchell, born to Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, date of birth, February 12th, 1876, place, Harrison Homestead, Wheeler County, attending Martha Wells, midwife. We'll need a new one. Soon enough, Martha said, glancing at the ring on Sarah's finger. Once the wedding's done and the names changed proper. Sarah watched from her rocker, Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms. 2 weeks had transformed him from a tiny, red-faced stranger into a person with his own expressions, his father's chin, her eyes, and a determined spirit, all his own. He's thriving, Martha noted with professional satisfaction. Strong lungs, good color. You'd never know he came early. He knew when he was needed, Sarah said softly, remembering that night. The sound of shots still echoed in her dreams sometimes, but they were growing fainter, replaced by Thomas's baby sounds and Luke's gentle laughter. Luke entered from the barn, bringing the crisp scent of winter with him. His eyes found Sarah, and Thomas immediately, as if drawn by invisible threads. 2 weeks had changed him too. The worried furrow between his brows had smoothed, replaced by smile lines around his eyes. "Mail's here," he announced, holding up a packet, including something from the territorial court. Martha gathered her things, understanding the moment's privacy. "I'll check back next week, though I doubt you'll need me. You're both doing just fine." After she left, Luke settled beside Sarah's rocker, unfolding the official documents. Judge Patterson moved quickly. "Your marriage to James is officially dissolved on grounds of bigamy and abandonment." Sarah touched Thomas's cheek, marveling at its softness. "And the other matter?" "Approved." Luke's voice was gentle with joy. "As soon as we're married, I can legally adopt Thomas. He'll be a Harrison in name and blood. He already is in all. The ways that matter." Sarah leaned into Luke's solid warmth. "Though I wouldn't mind making it official." Luke pressed a kiss to her temple, then one to Thomas's forehead. The baby stirred, yawning widely before settling back to sleep. "Martha said he's doing well?" "Perfect in every way." Sarah smiled. "Though she says he has your stubborn chin." "Poor boy." Luke chuckled. "Let's hope he gets your sense instead." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son sleep. The birth certificate on the table caught the morning light, its fresh ink telling only part of their story. The rest was written in the way Luke's hand covered hers, in the peaceful weight of Thomas in her arms, in the future stretching bright before them. "I never thought I'd have this again," Luke said quietly. "A family, a reason to come home at night. I never thought I'd know what real love felt like." Sarah turned her face up to his, the kind that builds instead of breaks. Luke's kiss was gentle, mindful of the sleeping baby between them. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with emotion. "The Reverend can come next week if you're feeling strong enough." Sarah looked around the cabin that had become her sanctuary, her home. Soon it would be filled with friends and neighbors, witnessing their vows. Thomas would have a new birth certificate bearing his true father's name. But the real change had already happened, in her heart, in Luke's, in the miracle of their small family forged from winter's darkness. "I've never felt stronger," she said, and knew it was true. The property deed lay unfolded on Luke's desk, its official seal catching the lamplight. Sarah traced the elegant script with her finger, reading the words that would bind their futures together even before their wedding vows. Territory of Wyoming. Deed of property. This document transfers ownership of the Harrison homestead, comprising 160 acres, more or less, to Luke Harrison and Sarah Elizabeth Harrison upon marriage, as joint property in perpetuity. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, though Luke had answered the same question 3 times already. "The homestead has been in your family for generations." Luke lifted Thomas from his cradle, settling the baby against his shoulder with practiced ease. "That's exactly why I'm sure. This land should pass to my family." His eyes met hers. "You and Thomas are my family now." Sarah touched the deed again, remembering another property document, the one James had forged, stealing her inheritance. But this was different. This was Luke, who gave freely what others tried to take. "I don't know anything about running a ranch," she admitted. Luke smiled. "You grew up on a farm. Besides, I've seen you with the horses. They trust you already." It was true. The mare Luke had given her, a gentle bay named Star, followed her around the paddock like a loyal dog. Even the more spirited horses quieted at her touch. "I've been thinking," Luke said, pacing slowly as Thomas drifted to sleep. "The south pasture would make good grazing land if we cleared it. And that grove by the creek, perfect spot for an orchard." Sarah caught the current of excitement in his voice. "An orchard? Apple trees, maybe some cherry. Your grandmother's quilt had cherry blossoms on it. Thought you might like to grow some of your own." The thoughtfulness of it brought tears to her eyes. Luke noticed and crossed to her immediately, his free arm pulling her close. "Hey now, none of that, unless they're happy tears." The happiest. Sarah pressed her face into his shirt, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and leather. I just never expected, after everything. I know, Luke's voice rumbled in his chest. But that's the thing about land. It doesn't care about your past. Only what you plant in it, what you grow. Thomas made a small sound in his sleep, one tiny hand clutching Luke's collar. Sarah reached up to stroke the baby's dark hair, so like her own. Speaking of growing, Luke continued. Martha mentioned the Cooper places for sale. Their daughter's moving to California, wants to sell quick. The place with the big barn, just past the creek. Luke nodded. Thought we might buy it. Fix up the house for Martha. She's not getting any younger, and that ride into town gets harder every winter. Sarah's heart swelled. Luke was always thinking of others, making plans to protect those he cared about. She'd like that, Sarah said. Being closer to Thomas. And to you. Luke pressed a kiss to her hair. She thinks of you as a daughter, you know. Sarah did know. Martha had become the mother she'd lost too young, offering wisdom and love in equal measure. We could plant the orchard between the properties, she mused. Create a sort of family. Compound. Already planning improvements to my homestead, Mrs. Almost Harrison? Our homestead, Sarah corrected, tapping the deed. Says so right here in official ink. Luke's laugh was soft, mindful of their sleeping son. That it does. Though you're not officially Mrs. Harrison for 3 more days. My heart's been Harrison since you found me in the snow. Sarah turned in his embrace, careful not to disturb Thomas. The rest is just paperwork. The deed on the desk caught the lamplight again, its promise of permanence shining like hope. Outside, the last of winter's snow was melting, making way for spring's new growth. Inside, wrapped in the warmth of love and trust, 3 hearts beat. In perfect harmony, a family growing strong as the land that would sustain them. The packets of seeds lined the kitchen windowsill like promises. Tomatoes, beans, carrots, and flowers of every color. Sarah had found them in town, carefully saved from last year's harvest by women who understood the power of growing things. Your mother's garden was famous in these parts, Martha said, helping Sarah plan the plots. They sat at the kitchen table, Thomas sleeping nearby in a cradle Luke had made. Those roses of hers bloomed till first frost every year. Sarah touched the packet of rose seeds reverently. Luke's mother's garden had been more than just a patch of earth. It had been her legacy, her art. Now it would live again. Luke says she kept notes about the garden. Sarah glanced at the leather-bound journal that held Elizabeth Harrison's careful recordings of planting times and growing seasons. That she did. Martha smiled. Though if you ask me, you've got her touch naturally. Those seedlings you started are the strongest I've seen. It was true. The windowsill was crowded with tiny green shoots reaching for spring sunlight, each one a testament to new life. Sarah had whispered to them as she planted them, sharing her own story of surviving winter. To bloom again. Luke came in from the barn, his boots muddy from preparing the garden soil. Grounds ready, he announced, rich and black as coffee grounds. Sarah rose to meet him, accepting his kiss despite Martha's playful tutting. Marriage had softened them both, making them quicker to show affection, to share joy. The roses go along the south wall, Sarah said. Your mother's notes say they'll get the best light there. Luke's arms tightened around her. She'd be proud, you know, seeing her garden coming back to life. We'll add our own touches too, Sarah said. A herb garden for Martha's medicines, a patch of sunflowers for Thomas to play under when he's bigger. Speaking of additions, Luke's voice held a hint of mischief. Found something in town you might like. He retrieved a small package from his coat wrapped in brown paper. Inside, nestled in cotton, lay a packet of forget-me-not seeds. Sarah's breath caught. Like the one in the journal, the day you found me. Thought we could plant them where I found you, Luke said softly. Turn that spot into something beautiful. Martha dabbed at her eyes with her apron. Lord, you too. Making an old woman weep over flower seeds. But Sarah understood. Every seed was a story, a chance to rewrite the past into something that could nourish the future. The forget-me-nots would bloom where she had almost died, transforming a place of endings into one of beginnings. Thomas stirred in his cradle, demanding attention. Sarah lifted him, breathing in his sweet baby scent. "Want to help Mama plant a garden, little one?" Luke gathered the seed packets while Martha copied the last of Elizabeth's planting notes. Outside, spring sunshine warmed the prepared earth, ready for new growth. Together, they walked to the garden site. Thomas watched with wide eyes as Sarah pressed the first seeds into the soil, tiny promises of beauty to come. Each packet held its own magic: sustenance, healing, remembrance, joy. "To new beginnings," Luke said, his hand covering hers as they planted the forget-me-nots. "And old memories made new," Sarah added, thinking of Elizabeth's garden, of all the springs that had come before, and all those yet to come. The seeds disappeared into the dark earth like prayers, like hopes, like love itself, invisible for now but growing stronger every day. The photographer's camera stood like a watchful eye in the chapel corner, ready to capture the moment Sarah Mitchell became Sarah Harrison. The morning light streamed through stained glass, painting rainbow patterns across the wooden floors. "Hold still now," Martha fussed, adjusting Sarah's cream-colored dress. "This portrait needs to be perfect. Something for Thomas to show his own children someday." Sarah touched the locket at her throat, Luke's mother's worn smooth by years, of love. Inside, Elizabeth Harrison's picture kept company with a tiny daguerreotype of Thomas, his serious baby face a mirror of Luke's determination. "I wish she could be here," Sarah said softly. Martha's hands stilled on the dress. "She is, dear, in all the ways that matter." The chapel door opened, admitting Luke with Thomas in his arms. Both wore matching black suits, though Thomas had somehow managed to rumple his already. "Someone wanted to see his mama before the ceremony," Luke said, his eyes soft as he took in Sarah's appearance. Sarah reached for their son, propriety forgotten. Thomas came to her eagerly, his small hands patting her face in recognition. "The portrait," Martha protested weakly, "will be perfect," Luke finished, "because it'll be real." The photographer emerged from behind his camera. "If I may suggest, the light is excellent just now. Perhaps a family portrait before the ceremony?" Sarah looked to Luke, who nodded. They positioned themselves by the chapel's east window, where the morning sun created a natural halo around them. Thomas, sensing the importance of the moment, settled quietly in Sarah's arms. "Now then," the photographer said, ducking under his black cloth, "think about what brings you joy." Sarah felt Luke's arm around her waist, solid and sure, Thomas's weight in her arms, warm and trusting. The love that had brought them all together, stronger than winter storms or old wounds, or the shadows of the past. The camera's flash caught them in that perfect moment, not posed, but real. A family forged by choice rather than chance. "Beautiful," the photographer declared. "I'll have it ready by the end of the ceremony." The chapel began to fill with townspeople, faces that had become friends over the long winter months. The sheriff and his wife, the general store owner, ranch hands, and their families. Each had played a part in their story, offering support, keeping secrets, standing guard against the darkness. Martha shooed Luke away. Bad luck to see the bride too much before the wedding, but not before he pressed a kiss to Sarah's cheek. "See you at the altar, Mrs. Almost Harrison." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of joy. Sarah would later remember fragments: the warmth of Luke's hands holding hers, Thomas's happy gurgle during the prayers, the way the Reverend's voice caught when he pronounced them man and wife. But the portrait, that captured everything. When the photographer presented it that afternoon, the entire wedding party gathered to look. There they were, caught in silver and light. Luke's quiet strength, Sarah's hard-won peace, Thomas's innocent joy. Behind them, the stained glass window cast its colors like blessings. "Now that," Martha said, wiping her eyes, "is what a family looks like." Sarah touched the image gently, marveling at how the camera had caught not just their faces, but their love for each other. This was what she'd been looking for all along, without knowing it. Not just safety or security, but belonging. The kind of love that built rather than possessed, that strengthened rather than confined. "Where shall we hang it?" Luke asked, his arms sliding around her waist. Sarah thought of the cabin, their home, with its walls that had witnessed their story from the beginning. Above the fireplace, she decided, where we can see it every day, where Thomas can grow up knowing exactly who he is and how much he's loved. "Perfect," Luke said, and kissed her again, a husband kissing his wife in front of God and their community and the camera's eternal eye, preserving their joy for generations to come. 1 year later, Sarah sat in her rocking chair by the fireplace, Elizabeth Harrison's Bible open in her lap. The family record page held fresh entries in her careful hand, each one telling part of their story. Thomas Harrison Mitchell, born February 12, 1876. Adopted April 15, 1876, son of Luke and Sarah Harrison. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell and Luke Thomas Harrison. Married April 15, 1876, Wheeler County, Wyoming Territory. Grace Elizabeth Harrison. Born March 3, 1877, daughter of Luke and Sarah Harrison. Little Grace nursed contentedly while Thomas played on a quilt nearby, stacking wooden blocks Luke had carved during the winter evenings. Through the open window came the scent of Sarah's garden, roses and forget-me-nots, blooming where snow had once threatened to steal everything. Luke's boots sounded on the porch, followed by his quiet entry, still careful, even after all this time, not to startle her. His kiss landed on her hair, then Grace's downy head, before he scooped up Thomas for a proper greeting. "Papa!" Thomas's first word had come last week, and he used it every chance he got. "How are my girls?" Luke settled Thomas on his hip, examining Sarah's face with the same tender attention he'd shown since that first day. "Perfect." Sarah smiled up at him. "Grace is growing like a weed, and the garden's coming in beautifully." Elizabeth's notes were right about everything. Luke's eyes fell to the Bible in her lap, noting the fresh ink. Adding to the family history? Seemed right to record it all properly. She touched the pages gently, for the children and their children after them, so they'll know where they came from, how they were loved from the very beginning. Luke set Thomas down, watching as their son immediately toddled back to his blocks. "Speaking of beginnings, Martha's all moved in at the Cooper place. Says she's already planning a herb garden to rival yours." "Good." Sarah shifted Grace to her shoulder, patting gently. "Though she's here more than there, helping with Grace and spoiling Thomas." "Family takes care of family." Luke's voice held the quiet certainty that had first drawn her to him. "Speaking of which," he reached into his coat, withdrawing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay a new pen, its silver nib catching the firelight. "Thought you might want something special for recording our stories," he explained. "Something that'll last." Sarah blinked back tears, pregnancy and nursing having left her more emotional than usual. Or maybe it was just happiness, spilling over at unexpected moments. "Our story's just beginning," she said softly. Luke knelt beside her chair, one hand on Grace's back, the other finding Sarah's. Thomas abandoned his blocks to climb into his father's lap, completing their circle. "And what a story it is," Luke agreed. "Found you in the snow, didn't I? Like God himself had left me a miracle." "Found each other," Sarah corrected, thinking of all the ways they had saved one another. "Found home. Outside, spring painted, the valley in shades of new life. Inside, Sarah reached for the pen, ready to write the next chapter of their family's story. The Bible's pages waited, blank and full of promise, like the future stretching out before them. A future built on love, trust, and the kind of faith that blooms even in winter's deepest snow.